by just saying that this is not a diagnosable psychological disorder. So even though it's not something that has a clinical criteria to be diagnosed, doesn't mean it's not something that should be taken seriously. And I feel like it's really, really important, especially now dealing with being in a pandemic. If we're being honest, it's been almost a year. So we are going into month 11. No, month 11, because March for a lot of us will be a year of us being socially distanced or quarantined to some capacity from what is normal for us. So I feel like this is really an important topic for us to talk about and for us to be aware of. I do think that COVID has caused us to focus a lot on the physical that it brings as far as how it impacts our physical body. I don't think enough was really given to how it has impacted mental health. And I'm kind of glad that this is starting to be more of a common topic when people are talking about COVID 19 and what we're dealing with this pandemic. They're also discussing what it has done to our mental health. So, mental exhaustion, number one, can affect physical well being. It can cause you to be physically exhausted, but it also can cause physical fatigue or chronic stress. And this is a result of overexertion from a mental capacity. So there's just a couple of ways or questions that you probably can ask yourself, right? Have you ever struggled to get out of bed? And it seems like it's not just a day to day thing, but it's like weeks at a time you're struggling to get out of bed. Have you gotten to the point where by the time the day is over, that your brain is like, excuse me, like going through sludge? It's almost as if it can't move at a normal pace. It's like taking a whole lot of energy for you to do just basic mental cognitive processes. Do you feel like your productivity is low? Those are possible, and I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on in my throat. Those are possible symptoms of you dealing with mental exhaustion. So, I want to give you what the physical symptoms will look like. You will find that you have higher rates of illness and you'll have lower immunity. You may have muscle pain. So, you may find that there's chest pain, back pain, just aches in different places that you didn't normally have. You may have gastrointestinal distress. There could be disturbances in your sleep, or you can have insomnia to where you're not sleeping properly at all. You could have headaches. You could have dizziness. Your blood pressure could be elevated, and you also could have heart palpitations. Some of the emotional symptoms that you could be dealing with could be feelings of depression, anxiety, apathy, or a general loss in your motivation, a detachment, increased irritability to where your mood is very irritable, even more so than just the average things that would irritate you. You could be very cynical or even pessimistic in your worldview. And you also could be feeling overwhelmed and helpless. There are also other symptoms that kind of are more social. Sometimes you'll find that your friends may say that you're never really around, and when you're around, you're not really engaged. You may find that you're taking more sick days than you normally take. Your family members or people that are really, really close to you may comment and say that you're more grouchy or impatient with them than lately. And they may find that you're being flaky when it comes to plans that you make that you're not following through. These are some of the behavioral symptoms as well as emotional symptoms that come from actually being mentally exhausted. One of the things I think I talked about with you guys when I first met with you, and it may have been the last session that we did, I talked about how with COVID-19 and working in the house, we found ourselves actually working harder and working more hours than we would work when we physically left our house, and how that actually takes a toll on the body. Um, we look at the fact that physically it will run us down, but we don't look at the emotional resilience our emotional intelligence, our ability to emotionally sustain and deal with situations that wouldn't normally cause us to fall over the edge, that also has been impacted. So it's really important to understand what this is so that you can identify if you have some of these symptoms and then put in steps in place to work on improving the situation so it doesn't continue to be an issue. I do want to split this up into two parts. I like to later on um, tonight to actually give you guys just practical tips on how to work with this. But I want to work through looking at some more things that you can look at that are possibly an indicator um, of burnout or mental exhaustion. You also hear it called burnout. So here's just some things in relationship to work. So work related activity, you may find yourself being alienated. And so a person that's dealing with mental exhaustion or burnout may view their job as increasingly over time to be stressful and frustrating. And you may start to even grow cynical about the work conditions that you're working in. So let's just put this practically into working during a pandemic. Everything is a lot more tedious now than it was prior to the pandemic. If you're working outside of your house and you have to work at your physical job location, I see Sister Payne has a mask on. So you may have to go through different like processes and procedures before you can actually get to work and do your job. And you have to do this every day that you go to work. So it's not like, oh, we had to do this for a month. No, we're talking about months and months and months, almost a year of having to go through these measures. It starts to be very tedious and stressful. And then you start to get very cynical about the working conditions. It's like, there starts to be an emotional distance because it's like you don't want to have to deal with the reality of what it is because it is so stressful, and you're starting to feel numb to the point where you're like, I know I have to deal with this, but you try to numb yourself to not have to acknowledge that this is the reality of your everyday. And the problem with that is that numbing things or trying to repress things or not deal with things doesn't make it go away. So that stuff is still there. I'll just give you an example for me, not work related, but kind of in a way. So for church, there's a skeleton crew of us that go to the church on Sundays and we do service live. So we have the band, we have the praise team, and then we have a couple of people that run the media for the stream. Um, 3 weeks ago, my brother-in-law tested positive for COVID. Because he's one of the people that's usually there to help run service, my sister called all of us that had been around it because basically it's family. It's me and my sisters, the praise team, my brothers, and one other person are the musicians. And then we have two other people that come to work the soundboard and to work the stream, to let us all know that we could have possibly been exposed. So at that point, now we had been really good. No one had gotten sick in the entire time. So we've been doing this for almost a year. No one within the group of us that have been coming had gotten sick. So we kind of got lax and took for granted. Yes, we would wear masks outside and other places, but we wouldn't always wear the mask once we got inside the building, right? So we got lax even with each other as time went on because we kind of got numb to the situation. It was like just on autopilot. We didn't really completely acknowledge what was happening in that particular setting. But what ended up happening is now we had, he tested positive. Another person that worked the soundboard was already positive and didn't realize he was sick. And my sister, my youngest sister, was exposed to him. So she gets it. So we have three people within a couple of days all test positive for COVID. So now 2 weeks, I'm not at church for 2 weeks. Now when I come back, it's like I'm a little agitated because now I got to wear a mask. Now I got to be reminded of keeping the 6 feet distance, keep being reminded of the fact no hugging, not getting close to each other. And it just, again, what I had emotionally distanced myself from when it comes to the pandemic, because I work from home. The only day I leave my house is to go to church on Sunday. I now have it back in my face and I'm irritable about having to go through all of that. But the reality is, if I don't do that, there's a possibility I could get sick or I could get my mother sick. My mother is up in age and she's there every week. Our church administrator is her age. So we're talking about people that are close to 70, right? Or at 70. And there's a responsibility that comes with that. So it may have been a little bit of burnout. Maybe it was necessary. I do feel like I felt different when I went back. I was irritated about the situation, but I did feel a little bit revived as far as the mundane every Sunday coming to do what we have to do every week and the rigor that comes with that. So sometimes it's necessary to take a step back. So this is just kind of a tip before I give the tips tonight. Take a step back, look at what you're doing. Maybe you can do something to make that mundane every day of having to go to work and having to deal with temperature checks and wearing a mask and sanitizing and washing your hands and keeping distant, making it not as mundane, and do something to kind of freshen it up so that you don't feel like you're just exhausted from the mental part that goes with all of that, because there is a mental part. There's no more just getting up and going to the grocery store. Now you have to remind yourself, do I have my mask? Do I have gloves if you're a person that takes gloves with you? Do you have at least some sanitizer with you so that after you touch a cart or whatever it may be, as soon as you get in your car, the first thing you do before you touch anything on your body is you're cleaning your hands as good as possible until you get home. Like, nothing is just simple anymore. And that can be exhausting if you're doing that every day, day in, for months at a time. And I feel like this is not just related to COVID. You guys are also dealing with grieving. So, grief on top of dealing with a pandemic also can be mentally exhausting, because there's so much that comes with not only unraveling your emotions when it comes to the loss, but the putting things in order, the business part of a person passing away. It's not just the person passes, you bury them and have a service and it's over. No, they have affairs you have to put in order. In your case, you have a pastor who pastored a ministry. So you have to worry about what is going to happen going forward. Like, how are things going to change and adjust going forward? You have to process that as you are processing, I lost this person, I loved and cared about them. And so now I have to deal with that on top of it. So a lot of these things are going to kind of come together for you guys, um, kind of like an intersection. And so the one thing I will say about this issue and just psychology in general, it's very much an intersection between biology, psychology, and sociology. So they call it a biopsychosocial model of how they look at this. So you'll be dealing with biological stuff, you'll be dealing with psychological stuff, and then you'll also be dealing with stuff in your social environment that are intersecting together that can impact how one situation can actually impact you as a complete person. The other thing I want you guys to pay attention to is any chronic physical symptoms that you start to have. For example, if you start having headaches very regularly and you're not a person that had headaches all the time, that is something that you should be concerned about. Now, you could have headaches because maybe you deal with hypertension or blood pressure that's elevated. Sometimes one of the physical symptoms when you're dealing with elevated blood pressure is a headache. But if that is not your issue and you're having headaches regularly, if you're eating properly, so it's not because you're not getting enough fuel into your body, then you might want to pay attention to how often it's happening and pay attention to what's connected to those headaches happening, right? If it just comes out of nowhere, you've rested, you've eaten, there's no other physical sources of why, then you may want to, again, keep this down, make a note of it so that you can go back and look at how often it's occurring and then bring it to the attention of your either mental health professional if necessary, or even your primary care physician. That might be also another thing that you might want to look into as well, just to make sure there's no physical causes. The emotional exhaustion is something that we oftentimes just overlook or blame on other things. So, a lot of you guys are probably very busy. So, you have a lot of stuff going on. If you have your job, if you have a family, if you have personal interests, if you do stuff at the church. So, all of these things, and then you have a social life of just things that you like to do that you're interested in, you may say, I'm just really busy. So, you know, the emotional exhaustion is just I'm drained because I have all these different things that I have to always think about or process or work through. Is always something in my day. That's okay short term. But if you're finding yourself like weeks at a time feeling emotionally exhausted, tired, coping is a struggle, um, the basic motivation and energy to get work done, things that used to actually be enjoyable. So you used to enjoy going to your job. You enjoyed what you did for a living, your profession. It starts to be taxing, and the energy and the motivation to go do it is no longer there. Again, take note of this, look at how long it's happening, because this may be a symptom of something that you want to actually look at. Another thing that I think is probably not just related to mental exhaustion, but also something that you can also connect to COVID is a reduction in your performance. So how well you're putting out what you do. So prior to, it may have been very simplistic for you to do a lot of the things that you did in your everyday tasks. So um, if you're a teacher for whatever subject you teach, it may have been very simplistic for you to do that to where you had a routine, your performance was peak because, again, you're motivated, you're rested, you're getting the social engagement that you need, the interaction is necessary, you're with people that are actually giving you good energy, you're eating, you're doing all the different things that allows you to be at your peak performance. But now, because of the situation you're in, you're working harder to get a lot of things done. There's a lot more mental um, processing that goes with that, that makes the basic stuff a little bit harder to do. You may find that the tasks that you really were excelling at are now starting to be subpar, and it could be work related, it could be around the house. So you may look at your house that used to be spotless and nothing out of place, and constantly, making sure your home was tidy and clean, and you may find that over the last few months that's not the case, where things are just kind of haphazardly everywhere. You really don't have the motivation to clean it up because you're dealing with a reduction in your performance because of the exhaustion and the burnout. You may even find that if you're a person who's a caregiver, so your main job is caring for a family member, that even that now, the performance in doing that, somebody that you love and care about, may even be impacted as far as performance. Um, you may start feeling negative towards having to do that particular task. So it's not that you don't love the person, but the fact that you're burnt out, you have negative emotions about having to care for a person because it is a very tasking and overwhelming thing. I'm watching my husband be one of the primary caregivers for my mother in law, and he's been doing that basically since we've been in the pandemic. She was in the hospital when the pandemic first, the lockdown first went in. And then she came home and she needed to have someone with her. So every day during the week, Monday through Friday, he goes to her house and he's her caregiver. And I watched how in the beginning it was a lot of hours that he was putting in. Some days he spent the night because in the beginning it was kind of critical for her to have someone there constantly. And I saw how he started to get burnt out. And so I had to step in, not because I don't want him to be there to care for her, but I also have to make sure that I'm there for him because that's the vow that I made, was to make sure he was good. So I would tell him, you need to get some sleep, or you need to see if you can get someone else to be there for you for today. you guys may have those days where you need to do that, where you may need to take a mental health day. I recommend, and I don't know if you all have jobs that allow you to do this or professions that allow this, but I recommend a person take, if you can, a mental health day at least once every couple of months. So every 2 months, just take a day that's not related to necessarily going anywhere or doing anything for church or doing anything related to any kind of activities, but just take a day, a mental health day, where you can just be by yourself and be okay. And so I think that that is really important because we often take for granted that we can keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, and we will continue to go, go, go. But eventually our systems will overload. It doesn't matter how much we think we're putting fuel in, we are not designed to not have tune ups, just like our cars. So I like to use practical analogies. All of us are driving age, drive a car. We know that at some point in time, yes, we put gas in the car. Yes, we make sure that the oil is where it's supposed to be. But eventually, your car has to get a tune up. Eventually, your car will need new tires. Eventually, your car will need an alignment. There's a possibility that other things need to be changed on the car because you can't just keep driving it without making sure you're maintaining the things that allows it to go. Look at yourself that way. You can't keep driving yourself mentally without making sure that you're taking care of the parts that allows you to go. Your mind is what allows you to go. I know we're in this physical body and it gets all of the credit a lot of times, but if the mind is not working, the body doesn't work. If the brain is dead, the body doesn't function, right? So the mind is very, very important. So you need to make sure that you're doing your tune ups mentally and emotionally on yourself to make sure that you don't get to a place where you are basically at a point where you have just collapsed and just crashed because like the car just broke down. So something that was small, right? You needed to get a tune up, turns into something big. And then the next thing you know, your engine now starts having issues and the engine has to be replaced. We unfortunately, our engines can't be replaced. So we want to make sure that we take good care of them and we do what we need to do in order to maintain ourselves so we can operate at peak performance. So the reason why this is really critical and why when Sister Carmen was just throwing out ideas, I was like, yes, let's go with this topic, is because there's a very seriousness that goes with mental exhaustion that I think often gets discounted. The fact that there are possibilities of hopelessness, feelings of hopelessness. There could be possible thoughts of suicide connected to mental exhaustion. You could also be dealing with things that are very critical. And so I don't want you guys to take for granted that it's just, oh, I feel a little depressed or I feel stressed or I feel anxious. It's not that big of a deal. I can get over it, because that's not the case. This could possibly lead to something very, very serious. And those who are dealing with mental exhaustion are at a higher risk of actually developing depression and being diagnosed with depression. So it's one thing to have a depressive episode. It's another thing to have feelings of depression or going through a situation where your mood is low and it lasts longer than what would be considered typical. But there's another thing to actually have clinical depression. So you want to make sure that you take this seriously and that you don't brush it off as if it's no big deal. So let's just talk about risk factors, because I think that this is important to identify if you're a person that's at high risk, so you can try to do things to alleviate the risks that exist. And so you guys can start putting questions or in the chat box if you have them, and then I will start answering those in this second half of our time. The first risk factor is unreasonable time pressures. So employees who have basically said they don't have enough time to get their work done in their workday are 70% less likely to experience high burnout. All right. Sorry, I said that wrong. If they have enough time in their workday to get their work done, they're 70% less likely to experience high levels of burnout and mental exhaustion. So if you're a person where you feel like in your workday you have enough time to get things done and managed, then you're less likely to be at risk. If you are the opposite, a person that needs more time and you never feel like your tasks and duties at work are ever completed in the time you have, you're at a higher risk for possibly dealing with mental exhaustion and burnout, because we can't gain more time. Time is something that we cannot get back. Time is something that we cannot manufacture. And so we have to make sure that we're paying attention. There's certain professions that are just higher risk in general because of what they do. Nurses, doctors, paramedics, firefighters. It seems unlikely teachers, mental health professionals, people that are in health professions that don't always have a traditional clock to turn off their duties are at higher risk for dealing with mental exhaustion and burnout. A next risk factor that you need to pay attention to is lack of communication and support, whether it be from a manager at work, or even in your day to day life. But let's use the work setting. Manager support has been found to be very, very important to be a psychological buffer against stress. So you may have a job that may have higher stress levels, but if you have proper support from your managers and those in management that are there to basically oversee operations, that has been found to be a very good psychological buffer. So it's really important that the employees feel supported by your managers, and it's been found that you're 70% less likely to deal with mental exhaustion and burnout on a regular basis if you have good managerial support. Um, can mental exhaustion exacerbate other disorders, substance abuse, depression? Yes. Um, if you already have a diagnosis of depression, it will definitely exacerbate that. You will also find that sometimes we go to substance use to deal with the exhaustion. So, for example, you may have issues with staying awake and staying alert. So, you may start taking substances to help you with that. I remember when I was in undergrad, and this was at the time I worked for Federal Express. So I worked at the airport ramp. So our hours were non-traditional hours. We worked graveyard shifts. So like at 2 in the morning, we would be up starting our work shift. And I had a coworker, no exaggeration. She was going to school and she was working. So she would go to school during the day and then she would work FedEx. And she was taking no dose daily like it was vitamins. And at the time, obviously, I didn't know what I know now, but I just knew that that couldn't possibly be a good thing. So a lot of times we think substance abuse, we think drinking, street drugs, things like that. She was taking something that you could buy over the counter, and it actually, because she was so exhausted from a mental standpoint, because it wasn't that she wasn't getting sleep, she was finding ways to get sleep, but mentally she was tired, so her body still felt tired, so she was taking no dose on a regular basis to stay awake. You may be drinking energy drinks. This is another one that is super super bad. um, Number one, energy drinks have high sugar content, which is never okay. And if you're the caffeine, again, all bad. So if you find yourself having to use substances to cope, not just to get away from the issue. So you're not just trying to avoid the issue and not deal with the issue, but coping, meaning just to do the day to day, that could possibly be because you are mentally exhausted. And so, yeah, I listen, the energy drinks, I can't stress enough, get away from those. If you can find another way, I'm always for vitamins and getting herbal and natural ways to get your energy levels up, B vitamins is the way to go. If you're having energy, low energy, your B vitamins are the way to go. Um, I found a place near me locally that does the B vitamin injections. So since COVID happens, what I actually do is I get 2 months worth of the syringe injections, and then once a week I do my B. It's the full spectrum of B vitamins. I do a B vitamin injection, and that has helped me a lot because my days would be very full. So when I was physically going to the campus to teach and do all the other stuff around it, I would be traveling a lot of places on the freeway throughout the day. So the B vitamin gave me the energy that I needed. In addition to eating right and working out, it helped me, perform optimally and have the energy that I needed to do that. You can also find liquid versions of the B vitamins that you can buy over the counter at your pharmacy. So those are really, really good for energy levels. Definitely, if you're an energy drink junkie, get rid of those and go to doing the natural way. If you can find a complete B complex, that will be the best way to go. B12, we always know B12 is definitely for energy, but a complete B complex will give you an even more elevated boost of energy, especially when you're taking it on a regular basis. And what you eat, the foods you eat, will also give you the vitamins you need. So make sure you're getting leafy greens and things that we know will give you those essential vitamins. Um, Another risk factor, lack of role clarity. So when you don't know what your role is, if there's ambiguity, if what is expected of you is not always clear, that can actually put you at risk for exhaustion. 60% of workers that know what is expected of them actually do better because of the role clarity. When there's moving targets, so you go to work, and every time you go to work, the expectations or the roles are different, and you're not sure what you're going to get from day to day. That actually leads to more exhaustion trying to figure out what it is you're supposed to do. And so I'm not talking about jobs that your day to day just looks different. So, like, for example, if you're a nurse or a doctor or a paramedic or a firefighter, your job itself is not ambiguous. Like, you know what you do, but what it looks like in practice might be different, right? In theory, we know you're a firefighter, you put out fires. There's other stuff that goes with that. But what that looks like from day to day may be different. You may have a day where there's a lot of fires, and then you have other days where there's not, more administrative stuff. It looks different from day to day, but your role is clear. There's no ambiguity there. If you're a nurse, what your role is clear. Now, how that is manifested from day to day may be different because of just the different conditions of what happens in a hospital. There needs to be clarity. My advice, if this is one of the ones that you feel like you can check off as a risk factor, is to start to ask for clarity for your role. If there is a job description, look at the job description and try to figure out, okay, this is what, when I was hired, they said this was my job description. And then also check with those who are over you in management that can possibly tell you and give clarity on what your role is so that you can have that clarity, because it's a risk factor thing. And I'm the type of person that if people don't seem like they want to move and give information, maybe you need to just drop this little tidbit in there. This is a mental health issue, so I want to make sure that I have this role clarity. And sometimes doing that will get people to actually be a little bit more serious and take the situation more seriously. If you let them know that this is bigger than just, I want to know what my job is. It's no, I want to make sure that I'm also healthy as well. Another risk factor, an unmanageable workload. So if your workload feels like you can't manage it, there's too much stuff on your plate, there's no way possible you can get it done. If you don't feel optimistic when you have to look at all the things that you have on your to do list, then you will start to feel hopeless. And feeling hopeless starts to making you feel overwhelmed, and being overwhelmed will lead to mental exhaustion. And so that is definitely something you need to look at with your workload. You have to find ways to make sure, number one, that you're managing your time, but also make sure that you're realistic in your time management. So, one of the things that I started doing when I was working on my dissertation was time blocking. So, what I would do is I would work in an hour increments. For every 50 minutes, I would take a 10-minute break without fail. And there's actually an app for iPhone and for MacBook that you can use. And I'm gonna put this in the comments. It's called Focus, and you can actually set it up as a timer. You open up the app, it defaults to the 50 minutes with the 10-minute break. And what will happen is you can put it in the background. You don't have to see the timer timing you. But when it gets to time for you to take your 10-minute break, it will alert you, and it will tell you to get up, get away from the desk or whatever it is that you're doing, and you need to take a 10-minute break. We do this in higher education. The way higher ed classes are set up, for every hour that a class is in session, 10-minute breaks are mandated. And they don't like you to put the minutes together. So, for example, I used to teach once a week classes. So that's a 3 hour class. And they technically would get two 10-minute breaks in the 3 hours, because for the last hour, it would basically end up being 2 hours and 50 minutes. So they wouldn't get a break for the last hour. I can't put the time together. I have to, at every hour, give them a 10-minute break. And that's the way it's set up for a reason, because you focus better, which is the reason why the app is called this. You focus better, you can manage your task better if you're doing it in a systematic way. So, what I like to do when it comes to workload is making sure that I have a top five every day. So, I actually brought my planner down here so I can show you guys. If I open it up, all my stuff's gonna fall out. But so, this is my Panda planner, and I got this on Amazon. The reason why I like this one is because just this part is 6 months. So, it has first, it has the annual, then it has the monthly. Am I doing that right? No, it goes monthly, weekly, then daily. So it'll have the month of January. We're now in February. So it'll have the month of February. And then I'll have all of my stuff written down for February. Then it'll go into the weeks. I'll have each week written out where I could put things that are happening in the week. And then for the daily, it will, and I'll just show you. I got all my markers and stuff in here for the daily. So, for example, this is a daily. I don't know if you really can see this, but you put stuff in and then you can check things off. If you have appointments, you can put appointments there. But I like to, for this, it allows you to put your top five. So, for this particular day, I knew I needed to put the course shells together for my online classes. I need to get the syllabi done. I was working on editing my book, so I needed to do 5 days worth of content of editing. I needed to call my printer, and then I needed to work on some stuff for another project that I was working on. So those are my top five for the day. But under that, for priorities, you can also put task lists. So you can break down those things into tasks. And then I also love the fact that it starts the day with I'm grateful for. I put the three things I'm excited about. I put three things, and then I put an affirmation. It also puts a place for focus for the day and what my exercise is for the day. And then at the end, I do a review of what my wins are, three of those, and how I can improve in any notes. And I do this every day. And so I found that doing this helps me manage the workload that I have, practically looking at what are some things that can get pushed, right? So I may have priorities for the day, but I try to make sure that maybe two of the five things are things that are not urgent. So that gives me flexibility with managing my workload. I think that that's really, really important, because when you can't manage it, then it just feels like it's too much. And when it feels like it's too much, then you really just kind of give up and don't want to do anything. And so then there's no productivity at all. So I definitely am all for top fives. You can do this electronically. There are apps that will allow you to do the same thing. Um, it's recommended that writing things down is actually better for a variety of reasons, cognitively, memory wise. It's just better to put pen to paper. But I'm all for doing both. So I have an electronic calendar. My phone has everything on it, but I also put it in my planner as a backup. And that has helped me manage my day and making sure that I always take my 10-minute break every hour. Um, Another risk factor is unfair treatment. So, anytime you feel like you're being treated unfairly consistently, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to experience mental exhaustion and high levels of burnout. And so unfair treatment could be you see favoritism happening in the workplace, you can see unfair compensation, you could be dealing with racial discrimination, gender discrimination, any kind of issues where you know that you're being treated unfairly, that puts you at risk. And so this is probably one that is not harped on a lot, but I think that COVID has actually exposed again um, the pandemic, the original pandemic in this country, which is racism. It has highlighted what we've already known. And so, because of that, the unfair treatment that kind of boiled under the surface a lot, some of this stuff is now just front page news, and everybody is seeing um, what it is. So, unfair treatment is definitely a risk factor that you can't disregard. You have to make sure that you're paying attention to every little thing that impacts you. If it impacts you emotionally, if it impacts you mentally, if you're physically impacted, all of that stuff matters. And so you want to keep a record of what is going on because it's really important to make sure that you're not ignoring these things and you have an accurate record of what's going on. So before I start giving some of the tips that I have, you can drop questions into the chat box now. I'm going to start with some of the tips now since we have a few minutes left. We got about 15 minutes left. Here are some strategies that you can start to put into place right now. Changing your work conditions. So, if your job is the source of your fatigue, it's the source of your mental exhaustion, make some changes in your work life. There may be ways that you can improve some things. So, some of the things that you may look at may be the actual setting that you have to sit in. So your work area, your desk. You may be able to look at making some changes with that particular thing. Because if you see the same thing every day, day in and day out, that sometimes can be a trigger or stressful for you. Hold on, I forgot to give this, and this is really important, and I want to give this before I go to back to the tips. Here's a way for you to look at whether or not you're dealing with mental exhaustion, the 3R approach. Recognize the warning signs. So I gave you guys symptoms and things to look at, the risk factors. Reverse. So reverse is the second one. You need to look at ways to undo the damage that has been done by seeking the support that's necessary and managing your stress. And then the third R is to build resilience, to make sure that you are taking care of your physical and emotional health, because doing those three things will allow you to deal with mental exhaustion and burnout. How will we be able to find the source of our fatigue? That's the reason why I say start to write down your symptoms, what's happening, and when it was happening. Like keep detailed notes. It can be electronically in your phone. Keep detailed notes of when this stuff is happening. So don't just say in your notes, I had a headache and how many days you had the headache, the dates. Actually put what happened that day, maybe in like short notes, so you can go back and analyze the day to see if maybe you can pinpoint if there's a pattern there. Like if there's a source that you're noticing is always there, that might be the stressor. And so that might be the source that you might want to look at. So it's really, really important to make sure that you look at that. I didn't even get into personality traits that actually can be connected to having this issue of mental exhaustion. And I do think that this is important, so I don't want to overlook this. There are certain types of personalities that are more susceptible to this being an issue. For example, if you are a perfectionist and you have perfectionist tendencies, meaning nothing is really ever good enough or you need stuff to be perfect, that can contribute to you having mental exhaustion and burnout. If you have a pessimistic view of yourself and the world as opposed to being more optimistic, if you have a need to be in control, so control freaks, you don't like to delegate, you feel like people won't do it right, so you're the one who has to do it, that is a personality trait that could possibly make you at higher risk. If you're a type A personality, a high achiever, that could put you at risk. I'm gonna raise my hand and say I am type a high achiever. I have always been this way. And I had to find ways to deal with modifying that to be able to still be me, but also making sure that I take care of myself, because when we're smaller, it's not as impactful. But when you become an adult and you have adult responsibilities to balance, then it really does become an issue. So you do have to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, even still be a high achiever. You can still be type A, but you do want to make sure that you are doing it in moderation and taking care of yourself. All right. And so let me go back to talking about some strategies. So the changing the work conditions was the first one. You may have to look at not just your work area, you may have to look at possibly a reduction in your workload. So maybe you have been doing more than you should have been doing and it was okay, and now it's no longer okay. So now you have to speak up. Don't feel like you're indispensable. No one is indispensable, because what you will find is people leave jobs every day for a variety of reasons, and they will find another person tomorrow or the next week to come in and get the job done. Don't self-sacrifice for a job because you feel like you're indispensable. You could be great at what you do, but you need to be okay for more than just your job and other duties. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself. I saw something on Facebook that actually kind of made me a little upset, because this totally plays into this doing too much, and overloading yourself. There was a teacher who was going through chemo, and she was literally doing Zoom sessions with her students while she was at her chemo session. And someone posted it. I think it was one of my sorors who posted it, and she was like, "We should not normalize this. This is not okay. We can be dedicated at what we do, but you also need to make sure that you take care of yourself." And a woman that's fighting a condition that could be life threatening should have the luxury to be able to take time off to only think about herself and to only worry about herself, and not worry about being on a Zoom call to teach her students. No matter how much you love them, no matter how dedicated you are to what you do, those students will still get taught. She needs to be using all of her energy to fight cancer, because chemo in itself is just as exhausting a battle as what it's supposed to actually cure. So it actually made me upset, because a lot of people was like, "Oh, she's such a dedicated person. We need more teachers like that." And I was like, "No, we do not need more teachers like that." Self-sacrificing yourself doesn't make you a great teacher. Loving what you do, being passionate about what you do, caring for those students, giving them the best quality education that you can give them from what you have control over, is making you a great teacher. Killing yourself to teach a student does not make you a great teacher. And I will say that for whatever your profession is, whatever you do, killing yourself for what you do professionally, and I'm going to say this, and it probably is not popular, killing yourself for working at the church is also not okay either. I'm going to say that again because I watched my father run himself into the ground for what he was doing to make sure the church was okay. Yes, we appreciated the byproducts of that, but I watched my father have a severe stroke that he never fully recovered from because he didn't eat properly, he didn't get enough sleep, he was constantly going, he had high stress, he just had all kinds of stuff he was dealing with. And then on top of that, he had hypertension and he had sugar issues. So all of this behind the church. And it looks like, oh, you're dedicated to God. The building is a building. Ministry can exist outside of that building. And if you're killing yourself for an auxiliary or for something that happens in a building and you feel like that's being dedicated to God, you got that wrong. Your life itself is the sacrifice. Your life is what God is asking for. He's asking for you to turn this life over to him. Your actions, your thoughts, your ways. And you can do that in a way that it doesn't kill you. So there's ways for you to minister when you don't even realize that you're ministering to people. You may be on your job and someone has a loved one pass away and you pray with them right then. That's ministry. That's what God wants you to do. He wants you to show love to every person that he created. So please don't kill yourself in the name. You say you're killing yourself in the name of the Lord. Don't do that. That's not what God is asking you to do. The living sacrifice, operative word, living, right? We need you to be here because your life is the sacrifice, right? To live is Christ, to die is gain. So we got to remember that if we're doing this for God, we have to realize that our life is a sacrifice and how we're living it is what he's looking at. Not a task, not a title, not an auxiliary. And listen, I'm all for it. I'm on the ministerial staff. I'm the head of our Christian education. I sing on the praise team. I do a lot of stuff at the church. Have over the years, I could list probably every auxiliary in the church I've been a part of. I'm part of the media team. Like I've done all that stuff. But again, when I can minister one-on-one with a person, when I can pray for someone, when I can show love to someone without even saying the name of Jesus, that is ministry. And that is what God wants from us. So please don't kill yourself in the name of the church. All right. That one was free. That wasn't even on my list of notes. I had to give that to you guys because we can get very zealous in our faith, and sometimes that we run ourselves into the ground. So we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm gonna save the rest of the strategies and the tips for tonight. Is there You're welcome, Sister Carmen. I feel like I have to say that because PKs understand this. We didn't always often get a choice when it comes to doing things at the church. And it's part, we're kind of programmed that way to always do. If there's something that needs to be done and we can do it, we do it, right? Not realizing that we're setting up the bad habit of overloading our plate. And then once we become adults and we have families and we have other responsibilities, we realize that the stuff that we could balance and overload ourselves with when we were younger doesn't hit the same when you're older, right? Because you have way more stuff to balance now. So if you don't develop those bad habits, you're in a better place. So definitely want to get rid of that if that's a tendency that you have. You have to give yourself grace and the space to take care of yourself. It's not selfish at all. It's not selfish at all. If you're sick or you're run down, you can't do anything anyway. So you definitely need to make sure that you take care of yourself. That is really, really important. Any last minute questions or comments that you guys have? Because I'm going to stop now because it's 7:27, so we're at our time.
Are there any questions? Anyone want to raise their hand or put it in the chat if you have a question? And if not, I'm going to ask if uh, Evangelist Sylvester, can you come on and can you pray with us and for us in regards to mental exhaustion, if you're available. It may not be. Okay, well, Dr. Brown, can you lead us in prayer? Yeah, could you lead us in prayer, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for allowing us to have this session. We thank you for what we have learned, and we ask you even right now to help us remember that we might apply it, that we will go forth and do the things that we need to do, but making sure that we're taking care of ourselves in the process. We ask you to bless our minds even right now. Give us a rejuvenation mentally, physically, and spiritually. We ask you to bless even right now the church as a whole, the Bell family, as they deal with and continue to process their grief and the loss of Bishop Bell. We ask you to continue to bless us, that we will understand that we are of no effect if we are burning ourselves out, and that we will take the time to love on ourselves as much as we love on others and the things that we are called to do. We ask you to continue to bless us, continue to protect us, continue to lead and to guide us. And we thank you for this all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that prayer. Thank you, everyone, for coming out, for joining us, members as well as some non members. We thank you all for coming out. And I pray that you all have a great day. And we will see you back tonight at 6 p.m. for part two of this topic. All right, you all have a great day.